Alright, welcome back to another web development video where I show you how to make modern websites using HTML5, CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. In this video I'm going to show you how to build a basic Navbar or navigation from scratch. And so a Navbar is just the part that sits at the top, and it's usually got a logo and it's usually got some links that go somewhere either on that page itself or they link off to other pages of the website. So this is one of the key components that you need to be able to build if you are in web development today. So if you're taking on front-end web development, this is going to be a necessary bit of code that you need to be able to create either for clients or for getting a job. Let me just set up our environment a little better here. So we're just going to do vanilla, just HTML and CSS, and this is not going to require any JavaScript this time. So what we need to do is we need to start with a semantic tag, and we'll do that by saying nav, and that's our semantic tag to show navigation. And let's just build out our actual navigation first, and then we'll add in some other components to the masthead. So we have an unordered list, and we'll use that for our navigation. And then each of our navigation elements is going to be a list item. And so we could say item 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, just for the sake of symmetry, let's just do 3. Doesn't seem symmetrical, but it is. And we're going to put an anchor link in for each of these. And we'll just say #0. That'll keep it from going to the top of the screen whenever we click on it. We'll close off our A tag like that, and so we have our navigation, our unordered list, and then our list items here. So you can see this is the beginnings of our navigation. And I encourage you when you're building out any website or any component for a website that you start with the HTML first, build out everything that you want to put into the HTML, and then begin to work through the CSS after that. You want to know what you're working with fully as much as you can before you begin putting things together. So this is only going to be one part of what we're going to call our masthead. And so I come from newspapers back in the day, and when I was in high school and college, and so I can only see these things as mastheads, which is what the top of the newspaper is called. You may have encountered that with a magazine. I'm not sure. And so what I'm going to do is we want the navigation over here to the right. This is a very common pattern, navigation to the right, and some sort of logo or name title to the left. So we're actually going to call this we'll call this a section, I guess. It doesn't really have a proper part to be called, and then I'm going to call that section, I'm going to give it a class already, and the class is going to be logo, and we're just going to put a name in here. So we'll just have an H1, and we'll just put site name. But this could be an image, it could be the site name, it could be whatever you want it to be, some sort of indication of what is the company, what is the product, what is this page about, would go right here. So normally you're going to have a logo to the left or a site name to the left. This might be called site title, and then some sort of navigation will be off to the right. Now right now they're stacking because these elements here are block level elements. So the section is taking up the entire width of the viewport, and this navigation is taking up the entire width of the viewport as well. What we want to do is we want to have these things side by side with one another. And for that, we're going to use Flexbox. So I think this is all that we need for just a basic navigation right now. It's good practice to put some sort of comments into your code. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I'm just going to do that, and then I'm going to hit Control and forward slash, not the backslash up by the backspace, but the forward slash with the question mark. And then that automatically gives us a comment there for whatever text that we're highlighting. We're going to call this our logo or site title. And could do better with the spelling. And let's just make sure that those are lined up. So we'll line this up. And then here we're going to have our main navigation. This is a little bit of my process. Just wanted to give you a sense of what it's like to create things. Sometimes it's helpful to say end of things. So I get a weirdness here. So we're going to end the navigation. This is more helpful as you have more elements on the page. Because when you're looking at it here, it doesn't make a lot of sense. We can pretty clearly see that things are what they are. But when you get into either minified files, or you begin to unpack files, or you're looking at them online, or you're looking at code that's not color coded for you and set apart for you, having these comments is really helpful. It's a little bit of overkill here, but we're going to go ahead and do it anyway. I especially like these ending ones, because if you have a huge nested section where it sort of bows out like this, knowing where intersections end, knowing where the outer section ends. Sometimes if they have class names, I'll even say like this, I'll say end the dot logo. So that tells me that up here where the class starts, this is where that section ends. And then if there's another section below, I know that I'm not, I know kind of where things are on the page. So I'll even do it like this at times. This is going to be ending the masthead. And you could even do it like this, since it already has an ID. You could do it like that. That way I know it ends the section that is the ID of masthead. So that's where this is typically how I might go about doing that. Some people might put it down on the line below. I like to have it right at the section, because again, if it's nested, I can see the nesting, and I can also see where things end. So I might wind up doing it with this as well. And so we're going to move into the CSS now. And what we want is we want the site name here. We want the navigation over here, not as a block like this, but we want it to be stretched out side by side. So we have a couple of options that we can choose, and I'm just going to go with the more basic option, which is Flexbox. And so I'm going to take we have two sections. We have our nav and we have our logo section. Those are both inside of header. And so I'm going to look at our ID of masthead, and I'm going to say display flex. Am I spelling that correctly? Oh, doesn't need this. It's already an ID. Okay. So I just had a typo there. So we're displaying it as flex, which means that all of the items that are inside immediately children of masthead, so this logo and this nav, they are going to be side by side with one another. Now I don't want them to be next to each other like this. I want one to be here. I want one to be sort of stuck on this side over here so that there's space between them. So we use justify content, and we say space between. Now that puts all of the remaining space for the line, puts it in between them. If we say if we say space, sorry. If we say space around, it takes the empty space and it puts it around each element. So essentially it's half on this side, half on this side, and then half over here and half over there. So it's sort of putting equal amounts of space on each side of each element. So you wind up with double the space here, but it's essentially this amount of space, and this amount of space are the same. And then there's equal amounts on the inside, you just can't see it. And when you move it, you can see that it remains and retains space around it. Maybe that's what you're looking for, not sure. The default is flex start, and that means that everything is pushed to the start of the line, the first of the line, and all the remaining space is off to the right. And if you do flex end, that means all of the elements are pushed to the end of the line and all of the spaces to the start of the line. I think there's one more in there that if you want to center the elements, then it takes both elements and it just puts equal amounts of space around the first and the last element, and it centers everything else in the middle. So if that's a sort of look that you're going for, you would use center. And then for each element, you'll have to create some space around each one. But let's just do space between. This is just a basic navigation Navbar header. And I'm going to go ahead and set the alignment. I'm going to align the items to the center. You can see it move this one down a little bit, but essentially what it does is it treats these as center line elements. So this one is going to be bigger than these because the H1 text is bigger than this regular A text. So when these line up, then they would normally sit at the tops. That's the default, which is flex start. That's the default. But when we want them all to sort of be in a center line, regardless of their size, we need to align the items to the center. Now this gets flipped if you, so flexbox is a little weird. It gets flipped if you do flex direction column. Then now the justified content becomes the vertical and the align items becomes the horizontal. So you got to sort of watch out whenever you're changing the direction of the flex items. So you can see now that the vertical is the center. They've been centered on the page. So if we remove that, then you can see that the vertical is not centered on the page, it's flex start. And then justify content doesn't do anything, it's just space between, because this is the height of our masthead here. You would see that change if you set height 100 viewport height, and then now you can see that our masthead element is now 100% essentially of the viewport height, whatever that is. And so now there's a place for things to be spaced between. But if you don't have that, then everything's sort of automatically just the size of the content inside of it. So something to think about, something to consider. And yes, we are going to deep dive into this. So if you want to move forward and just know how to do things, then you can do that. But this video is really showing you, sort of breaking down what we're going to do, why we're doing it, what everything does, how you manipulate things, because you need to have all the tools and know how the tools work in order to create the thing that you need. Because this basic header is fine for most websites, but some of them you're going to need to know how to manipulate things. So the next part is let's get our main navigation straightened out. So we have our nav element here, And we don't want it to be vertical like this. What we want is to be horizontal. Again, we're going to use the same idea with Flexbox, but we're going to put it onto our navigation. So I'm just going to give this a class of main nav, and then we're going to say a class of NAB Menu, and then I'm going to copy this, paste it here, and this is going to be our NAB Menu item. Okay, so let's just copy that, and then we'll paste it down here and here. So now we have our main nav is our outer wrapper. This actual list is our NAB menu, and then each individual item, item 1, item 2, item 3, each of these items is our NAB menu item. So let's get to styling these things, and first I want to let's just go top to bottom. So we'll say the main nav is going to be display flex, and it's going to be we're going to align the items. Actually, let's not do it on that one. We want to do this on the nav menu, because remember, it's the children that are flex, so doing that to this is not going to do anything. It's to affect these items, so there's no need to do that. So let's do display flex, and then you can see now that we've changed our items here, and the list style is going to be none, and that should remove the bullets, so it takes away the bullet points. And we could do some more fancy things as far as setting the width of this nav element to 50% or something like that, and then spreading these items out over that. I tend to find I want my navigation elements to just sort of stick to the sides, and I don't want to have to worry about a lot of flexing their individual, like these. I don't want to have to worry about flexing this particular element. I want it to stay nice and fluid. Try to stay away from giving things explicit widths unless I really need to. So we're just going to leave it like that, and then what we're going to do is on each of these items we'll put a little bit of margin to the left. So we'll come down to our nav menu item, and we want the space to be to the left, right? Because we want it to stay sort of tucked away to the right side. So I'm going to say a margin to the left of 1 rem, and that should space them out nicely. You could do more than that. 1 rem is going to be equal to, for most browsers, 16 pixels. Unless you explicitly say in the body or the HTML or at the root that the font size is 18 or 20 pixels or whatever it is. So whatever it is at the root, at the body level, at the HTML level, one of those, whatever that number is for the font size, that's what 1 rem is going to equal. And so 2 rems is going to equal 2 times that. So for us it's 16 times 2, and that's 32. 1.5 is 16 plus 8, because half of 16 is 8. So that's 24. So you can create a nice little system of typography just based off of the rem system. If you need more flexibility, or if you want elements to be a little bit more dynamic, you can use ems, but ems are not based on the root declaration at the body or the HTML level. They're based on whatever our setting is for the parent. So if we set the parent to something, and then we say to, like, let's say we set the masthead to a font size of 32 pixels. Now 1M equals 32 pixels. 2M equals 64 pixels. So you can see that here we're going all the way back to the root of the website. So the very farthest back where there's a declaration for the font size, that's where we're going back to. For here, it's going to, or for M's, it's going to be based on whatever the closest declaration is to it. And so if you need more dynamics, you can use M's and Rems both. There's lots of articles out there to read about the difference between them and when to use them. I prefer to just sort of go with root M's because it helps to do design. It helps to quickly iterate and make websites. But maybe your needs are a little bit more sophisticated, so something to consider, play with, see the differences between them. I tend to go with Rems for both font sizes and for spacing, so that makes it easier for me to understand, and it gives me a little bit more dynamic range. So if we do change the root font size, then that means that everything is going to sort of grow and change at the same time. Okay, so we have our NAB menu items. They have one, so this one is actually going to have one rem of space over here. So whatever this space is, it's going to be on this side too. So just something to take note and remember. Sometimes that gets in the way or needs to be adjusted. Alright, the last thing is we don't want it to sit up against the sides here. So it's doing okay for the top and the bottom. And that's because this here, let me show you. Let's get out and I can show you what it looks like. If you're new to web development, then Control-Shift-I. I'm using Google Chrome. Control-Shift-I will open your web development tools. Everything is very, very slow. I don't understand. So it opens up your web development tools, and then you can see everything here. This is your element inspector. So you can just roll it over. After it's highlighted blue, you can roll it over any element, and it'll show you a little bit about it. You can see that in our NAB menu, our unordered list, it still has some margin on the top and bottom. And for our H1, it still has some margin on the top and bottom. Right now, 21.44, and then this one is 16. So they're not equal. And this is going to take the space, this whole element here is going to take the space of the largest element. So the largest element is here. So this one has a margin of 21.44 pixels on the top and bottom, which means that this one is also going to have 24 pixels. So you can see that it doesn't reach the top, right? Our main navigation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the margin on both of these elements so that I just have a little bit more control over what's going on with them. So for our logo, we can call it a logo. Let's actually just give this an explicit name. Sometimes it's okay to just say logo H1 and just move on with that. But I'm actually going to call this site title and just give it an explicit class name because I want to. You can't deal with the margin of the H1 through this class. You have to be on the H1 itself. So I'm going to go here and say site title. And I'm just going to say margin of 0. And you're going to see everything shift, right? So we shifted up a little bit, and now it's all taking on the margin from this element. There's still one rem, 16 pixels on the top and bottom of this NAB menu. So we can just say margin of 0. And then now you see it pulls it all the way up. So the very top of this element is at the top, same here, and the very bottom of this element is right here. So if we go back, you can see that everything is different now whenever we look at it. There's no declared margin here when I roll over it. Also, no declared margin here. You can see our space over here. That's our one rem of space to the left. And I want to get rid of the padding over there too. You can see that on this element there's a padding to the left of 40 pixels, and that's given to all unordered lists. So if you want to completely style your unordered lists, you can get rid of the padding too. Padding is normally something I get rid of with unordered lists unless I'm just actually using it as a list. So now we refresh, and you can see that there's no padding. There's only this margin on each item. You can see the margin there a little bit. Yeah, there. So very brief. And what we want to do is we want to put a little space here on the right, and we want to put a little space here on the left, and we want some space between the top and the bottom as well. And the way we do that is we come up to, I'm going to come up to the masthead, and I'm just going to create a little space. Sometimes I would do a masthead inner. If it starts to get very complex, I might do an inner div here and just separate masthead from all of the stuff inside of it, especially if I need to change things. It's really hard to change an ID, so you might want to put a class up here of masthead. It's a lot easier to change a class or to add an active class through JavaScript to a class name than it is to change an ID. So just sort of remember that. But if you need to roll back up to the top of the page, or you want to make sure that someone can access this particular element, you can give it an ID. And let's just go ahead and change this to the class name, because it just makes styling a little bit easier. And we get the same, the same effect. It's pointing to the same thing, whether it's the ID or the class. So let's just go ahead and do padding here of 1 rem. And let's see where that gets us. That's usually okay. 16 pixels of padding on the top and bottom and the left and right. And you can see here that we now have our padding on there of 16 pixels, the top and bottom, left and right. This also lets you know, since we did 1 rem, it lets you know that 1 rem for Google Chrome is going to be equal to 16 pixels. So if you're wondering what the browser is going to do, this is a good way to find out, because we're just allowing the browser to determine what the pixel size is to start out with. We're not changing anything so far. To my knowledge, CodePen doesn't do that automatically. So you can see here we have a nice navigation bar, and all the way down to 380 pixels, we get this nice sectioning. One of the things that you are going to run into is this. There aren't too many 320 pixels. This is about the size of an iPhone 5, which is an old and pretty small phone. Most phones are going to be in this 350 range here. So let's say because we don't want it to get where it's too ugly, so let's say at 400 pixels, we're going to make sure that this line here drops down. And since we only have 3 items, it's really not that big a deal. I don't even know that we would need to build a mobile menu per se for this. So let's just go ahead and do a quick style for this part, because it does break down a little bit. Now you could change the font sizes of these so that when it's at this size, the font sizes just get smaller. But if you want to keep these same sizes, we can do that. We make a little change to our flexbox. And because we want, the problem is with this outer flexbox, the masthead, we need to make our changes there. So let's go ahead and we'll add a media query. And at the minimum width of 400 pixels, we want it to be just like we had, which is we want it to say, actually we don't even need a media query. Let's not even put that in there. We can just say here, flex wrap of wrap. So if we just declare it, we don't really need a media query to make that happen. So what this does is whenever there's not enough space and it starts to bunch up, it wraps. So it makes sure that it preserves the integrity of each of the elements. Now I told you before that we're going to run into some issues with this margin here, right? So we can see the issue now. We're going to have to clear that. So let's take our NAB menu item, and we only want there to be margin when it's more than 400 pixels, right? So at media, and the minimum width needs to be 400 pixels. And let's just take our NAB menu item here, and we'll just cut it, paste it in there, clean up the formatting a little bit, and now okay, there it goes. So it's not 400, it's let's say 350. Let's say 350. Always let the content determine what it does. So always let the content determine what it does. Okay, so here we're good. We're running into something real weird. So maybe we do want to make sure that flex wrap happens up to 350. So the way we can do that is we can say at the maximum width of 350 pixels, we want the masthead to do something, and then after that we don't want it to do that. So we want our normal style to be no wrap. We don't need these things because it'll already be flexed, and no, that's not right. We won't need those things. Okay, so this says up until 350 pixels we want flex wrap to be in place. So now you can see it needs to be more than 350. It needs to be 375. We'll say 375. So it's going to wrap at 375. This one down here needs to be equal to that. I'm trying to figure this out on the fly. So we have a wrap there, and we're going to have to deal with that. Let's say the NAB menu item is going to be a margin to the right of 1 rem. So let's say we're here. Okay, so we get a margin to the right of 1 rem, and then as we come out, it's going to lose its margin a little bit. And we're going to have to say a margin to the right of 0, because that's going to, we got to cancel this one out at some point. So we're trying to switch it from margin right to margin left. So we have to cancel the margin right out, otherwise it's going to also create, it's going to be 1 rem on the left, 1 rem on the right, which is not what we want. So we get a pretty decent wrap there. It could be better. We also need to add something here. So in our NAB menu, if we get rid of our margin, you can see that it gives us a proper margin on the top and bottom. So on our NAB menu, we're going to say app media, and then anything after 400 pixels. Is it 400? Where do we break? We'll say anything after 375. Is going to be a margin of 0. But our original margin is going to be there if we're at smaller sizes. Okay, so you see how that works? Oh, we got to do it right. So NAB menu. Sorry, I'm not accustomed to writing in vanilla CSS anymore. So we'll say margin 0. And then now you can see that we keep our margin here for our items. So there's nice space between them. And then as we come out, it shrinks everything up. It gets rid of that margin when we get out. And so we have our regular Navbar. Okay, so that's how you sort of work through touch and feel based on the elements that are actually present inside of whatever your flex element is, or whatever you're doing as far as your section that you're working on. How does it look and feel? If designers have specifically said at this breakpoint it needs to do this thing, you still have to decide, okay, between that breakpoint and when it starts looking really bad, like what do I need to do in order to make this happen? Because they're only working at fixed points if you're getting a design from a designer, but you have to deal with all of the in-between between one fixed point and another, because we don't design only for one particular size, but you have to sort of see those as a guide. Okay, we want it to do this sort of thing after this breakpoint size. If you're a designer and you're learning code, it's good to know that, because you just need to know that at 700, if you've made adjustments at 768 pixels for a tablet, at 700, some of those things that were at 400 are not going to look good. They're going to need to be adjusted along the way. So just something to think about. This is a struggle between designers and developers, and something that you just have to, everybody has to understand. We want to get to certain places, yes, but just like animation, there are keyframes. There are things that happen, or tweens. There are tweens in between the keyframes. So we got to do something with that. We get left with what choices to make and what decisions to make with those. So that's what we're trying to do here. So there's a lot of look and feel. There's no blanket statement of how wide or whatever that things need to be, because once you add a fourth item, or you take one of these away, it changes the entire equation. So you have to sort of, deal with things as they are. Okay, so that is the just a standard navigation. I'm going to show you one last part, because I think it's important for you to be able to understand. There's a lot of sticky headers out there. So what we call a header sticky, we need to know how to deal with that and what to do with it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a minimum width here. So at a minimum width of 365 or 76 pixels, we want to do all of this stuff here. So up to 375 pixels, we want to do this stuff. After 375 pixels, we want to do this. And then our base styles are going to be up here, so we can actually take our padding, since that's the same between these two things. That's what we want from the very beginning of the website. We can put that there. Going to erase it here. And we want it to be display flex. So there are certain things that we want for all of these items. And we also want it to be these things. So we're just cleaning up our code a little bit before we move on. Up to 375 pixels, we want it to be flex wrap, so we don't even really need this anymore. So let's see how that looks. We get the same styles. Okay, so the same thing is happening as before, but these are our baseline styles. These are the things that we want to do regardless of the size. But up to 375 pixels, we want it to wrap. But after that, we don't really want it to wrap. I suppose we could just put that here. Can we do that? And then it still works the same. Mostly the same. Okay, so we can even eliminate a lot of this code. Sorry to take you down that rabbit hole, but it was good to show you some different things. So this is what we needed to add. It's still got flex wrap to it, but it's not going to wrap because these items are not coming up close to each other. What we really needed to change was the NAB menu here, right? At 375 pixels, we need to go margin 0, and then when it is smaller than 375, we need it to have its original margin of 1 pixel on top and bottom. If the bottom is a problem for you, like if you need to cut this space on the bottom, then here you would just you would say something like margin initial and 0, and then that would effectively eliminate the margin on the bottom. We won't be able to see it here very well. So if we get down here to where it's smaller and we want to look at this, do we refresh? Maybe we're not under 375. Oh. It's not doing right somewhere along the way. Let's see, margin 0. It's telling me there's an error there. I suppose you could just say margin bottom like that of 0. Again, when you get here, it's going to clear out all the margin, so we wouldn't have to change that for anything. And now we can see, oh, we've got to refresh. There you go, you saw it come up a little bit. So now on our NAB menu, if you needed to clear out the bottom margin for some reason, then you can do that and leave the top margin between those two items. Okay, and I told you I'd do a sticky. We need to create more content so we can see it. I'm just going to grab some dummy text. This is a site that I created just to be able to get some dummy text. So you can click on it and get very real text. This is not lorem ipsum. It's just regular text. Let's just go down here and create a let's call main. We'll input our text and we're just going to have to make some paragraphs out of this. Some closing paragraphs. The way I'm selecting multiple lines is Control and then click, and that allows you to handle multiple lines of text at the same time. If we do Shift, we can get a lot of them. I'm just doing the tab to get everything a little better aligned here. So now we have some paragraphs here. And what we want is when we scroll, we want this to all stay at the top. So let's go ahead and refresh this so we can see all of our text. Okay, our text is in there. We can see there are all of our paragraphs. And we need to go to the masthead, to the top. And what we're going to do is we're going to say position sticky. And once we do position sticky, it's sort of like position relative and position absolute at the same time. So it's excuse me, it's a little bit confusing to me about how it works, but that is how it works. And so just like position absolute, we need to tell it where it needs to stick to. And so if you want it to stick to the bottom, then it needs to be, you could say bottom equals 0, just like you would do bottom, like a bottom fixed element to the bottom, a sticky bottom. Because this is at the top of our page, though, it's never going to get, you would need content above it in order for it to stick to the bottom. So it'll stay to the bottom until this element gets away from the bottom. We want it to stick to the top. And what I love about the position sticky is that you can see that even though it's stuck to the top, we don't have to account for, if you use fixed positioning or absolute positioning, it takes it out of the flow of the document. And so all of this content here is going to get pushed up to the top of the page, and this is going to be sort of over the top of everything. But with position sticky, it leaves it in the flow of the document. You don't have to account. All of your padding, all of your margin for this element are actually going to still affect what's underneath it, yet it stays at the top. So you can see that there's a problem here. We need a background. And we're just going to say background color is white. And so now you see that our background, it separates it from the content, and that gives us a nice sticky header. This background can be, it can be anything to separate it out from the content. And you can even put a little box shadow. So let's say on the x-axis 0 pixels, on the y-axis maybe 5 pixels, 10 pixel spread, 20 pixel, oh, that one's spread. So let's do 5 and 30 to soften it, maybe less. Okay, and then I like to, I normally like to do an RGBA color there, but you could do like a very soft sort of gray color. You could do black. If you do black, that's the, that's the default. But I like to do an RGBA color, which would be maybe, can we do AA? Will it let us? sometimes it'll let you do these funky numbers at the end. Oh, I'm missing one, that's why. Okay, so if you add some of these numbers at the end, or these different declarations at the end, then it allows you to create a luminous, like an RGBA, where it's handling the alpha color. I'm not as familiar with those and how it works, but you could just as easily come over here and find that out by going to your site tools. You can see our shadow here. This is the masthead is where our shadow is. So we click on it and we look over here, we see our color. And if we just had regular black, if you click on the color, it brings up the color picker, and then this is your this controls your alpha channel. So you can you can see on the screen how it's making it like a lighter color because of the alpha. Right, so it's not full black anymore, it's something else. And then you can see it's tacking on these, this is your regular hex value with the 6, and then these last two values are creating it as a hex value with transparency. So this is sort of something new that we get to deal with. So you could do this in SAS, that's how I do it. So I do an RGBA color with a transparency, but you can also figure that out through your dev tools. So if you want the transparency to be, this is like, you can figure out the RGBA here. So if you want it to be 30%, and you click here and you get back to the hex, then you just take this, copy it, bring it back into your code, and you can copy it there, and then it'll give you a 30% opacity. And you see how that works. And then maybe at that point you just need to tighten it up a little bit. Right? So now you have a sticky header that continues to keep its relative positioning while it's at the top, but as soon as you scroll past this element, it sticks to the top. So that gives you this sticky header, and that works all the way across, regardless how wide your text is or how wide your viewport is. So that is the basic Navbar. It gets more complicated than that depending on what elements that you're adding to the navigation bar, but hopefully this gives you like a real in-depth breakdown of what we're thinking about, how we're using Flexbox, what's possible, and then how you can make those adjustments to different things. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down in the comments section below. Let me know if the sound is okay, because I'm using a new microphone, so I just need to sort of work that out. Sound is an issue always, because I don't have a studio set up. I'm just here at the computer with the headset mic. So just let me know if it needs to be up or down, or I need to be clearer. It's been 3 or 4 months since I've done any videos. I was in China actually for several months, and so wasn't able to have access to different things that I would normally have access to in the United States, but now I'm back and I feel like there's a lot of things to share, and hopefully you'll share this as well with other people. What I want to focus on is, what are the basics? What do we need to know in order to be front-end developers in this time in 2020? Not the full gamut of CSS necessarily, but what are the skills, what are the types of elements that we need to create in order to make a full website. So hopefully that'll get everybody up to speed, and you'll be confident to be able to build these particular things, at least the basics, and then we'll move on to more advanced examples. And some of you have been asking for more lengthy examples, and hopefully this fits the bill for you. If you like this video, please share it, subscribe to my channel, and you'll get notifications when there are new videos that come out, and I'll try to be doing 1 or 2 a week again, sort of on this similar schedule I was on before. And Again, I love to hear your thoughts. Are there things I can do better? Is there something I missed to clean up the code? And I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you again next time.